Hey, Greysteel Nation. Sully here with the Barbell Prescription. And a lot of you have reached out to me about this new video with Peter Attia and Stuart McGill, a couple of very prominent fitness influencers who've rattled trees by implying that deadlifts and squats are inherently unsafe. Well, that's news to me. So I watched the video, and although I don't do many response videos, I'm going to do this one because I think we can learn a lot from it. I don't want to pad this video or waste your time, so let's get to it.
I have to tell you, Stuart, I'm a bit conflicted personally, and I'll explain why. I obviously have no desire to do anything that I deem stupid anymore, right? So my days of gritting through painful anything are long over. I know the difference between discomfort that is worth pushing through and pain that is not. But when I think about, in particular, squats and deadlifts, I'll tell you where, especially around the deadlift, which is an exercise I really, really enjoy, where I feel conflicted. On the one hand, I feel like now that I'm so tuned in to how to do this movement correctly, it's a really wonderful audit for my stability system. Right. Again, I'm embarrassed to tell you how much I didn't know when I was deadlifting. At no point did I understand the importance of tension in the arms, intra-abdominal pressure, the variability in foot pressure on the ground, like none of that stuff. Right. It was just pure brute force stupidity. Today, as I know those things, it allows me to modulate force and to, on a good day, kind of push the envelope a little bit in what I perceive as safe. So on the one hand, I think, yeah, I should be deadlifting my whole life. I don't need to deadlift 400 pounds anymore, but I should be deadlifting because it's this great audit. And on the days that I don't feel it, I back off.
So that's the intro by Attia. Pretty right on there.
And then on the other days, I say, Peter, you don't need to do this anymore because honestly, you can still get the same or nearly the same activation for all of the muscles involved using other movements, single leg movements in particular, where you don't have a fraction of the axial loading. And yeah, you might need to do 2 exercises instead of 1.
And now you've lost me. Peter's implication here, deliberate or not, is that axial loading, by which we mean compressive loading of the spine and hips, as by deadlifts, is intrinsically bad. And it's not. Axial loading is one of the major mechanisms by which deadlifts, overhead presses, and squats deliver an osteogenic stimulus to the spine and hips, where folks over 50, especially ladies, need that osteogenic stimulus the most.
There's a lower risk approach to get it. And in other words, deadlifting is valuable, but you have a narrow operating window in which you can potentially hurt yourself. So
is the operating window that narrow? I mean, for general population training deadlifts for strength, are the performance constraints really that tight for such general population loads? I mean, how do we know that? How did we find that out? Where's the data that directly correlates correct form, assuming we get a consensus on that, with injury rates in the general population trainee? Because I don't see any citations on that here. Given the fact that YouTube is full of people performing crappy deadlifts, and that Attia, by his own admission, was doing suboptimal deads for a long time and apparently got away with it.
Right. Again, I'm embarrassed to tell you how much I didn't know when I was deadlifting. Like none of that stuff, right? It was just pure brute force stupidity.
How is it that now we're talking about deads like the performance parameters are as tight as a fighter pilot's in a 3G supersonic dogfight? That it just isn't so. People perform errors deadlifting all the time. Where are all the cripples? Where are all the bodies? Yes, of course we want to perform deadlifts properly, and there are no shortage of resources to learn to do that. But to imply here, as Peter is doing, that deads represent a tightrope between benefit and danger, and that the therapeutic window of the deadlift is so narrow that we should consider dispensing with it entirely? That is, as far as this video goes, and as far as I can tell from the complete absence of any good literature on this point, and as far as I know from my own clinical practice, an assertion completely without any foundation.
How would you advise a middle-aged person or even a non-middle-aged person who's sort of thinking through this particular issue?
Let me tell you some stories. Let's talk about Ed Cohn. Do you know Ed Cohn, the
I sure do.
greatest
Yeah.
powerlifter of all time? I was with Ed a couple of weeks ago. I'll tell you a funny story about him if you like in a minute.
You're losing me fast here, Stuart. So I think Peter's a strong guy and a smart guy, but I have to break it to you both. Peter is not Ed Cohn. You have never and will never do the things Ed Cohn did or train the way Ed Cohn trained. And the same is true for 99.9999% of all the people who will ever live and do deadlifts.
But anyway, Ed, when he would set a personal best, he'd take a couple of months off afterwards. To set a personal best is so demanding of your body.
True enough. Deads should not be trained at heavy loading, meaning in the intermediate or advanced levels, more than once a week. Most of our novices and intermediates at Greysteel, after the raw novice period, have a heavy day and a light day on deads, and those doing heavy, light, medium, intermediate structure will pull a heavy dead once every 10 days or so. I pull my heaviest dead singles once every 3 months, and I shoot for 405 once a year at most. So what? That's not an indictment of the exercise. It's a brilliant illustration of the ability of the deadlift to deliver a powerful training stress, one that we should respect by engaging in rational programming. The intensity of the deadlift isn't a bug. It's a feature.
If you set a true personal best, most people experience microfracturing just underneath the end plate of the trabecular bone. Now, those microfractures could be a good thing or a bad thing. The professional powerlifter will take a week off. They train heavy deadlifts or squats once a week because it takes a week to really scaffold on. Takes a week. If you deadlift in another 3 or 4 days, the way some trainers, they might deadlift a client 3 times a week. That allows those microfractures to accumulate until finally you've got a full-blown end plate fracture. If you look at the great strength athletes, they train deadlift. And again, if you go to our website, look at the testimonials at the bottom, the number of world-class deadlifters who are on there. So, you know, I've worked with quite a few of these people through their injuries.
Right, I get it. Those are the people who come to you, powerlifters and other professional athletes who push their bodies beyond the breaking point to excel in performance. That is not the same population as the people looking to reverse sarcopenia and osteopenia and save some function and some muscle and some bone for retirement. Those are the people who come to me, and we don't give them microplate fractures, even though we train them in the deadlift. And, you know, they're doing just fine with their deadlifts and their grandkids, and they're dancing, and they're hiking, and they're salmon fishing, and, you know, life.
I'll say, would you rather, as your goal, have the ability to play with your grandchildren on the floor when you're 80 and get off the floor and pick them up? And they pause for a minute, and they'll say, yeah, I like that goal. I say, well, you can't have both.
Really? You can't have both? That's confusing to me because I know a lot of people who have both.
If you think you're going to continue having deadlift personal bests, you will not. You will have artificial hips, all of these other things, because how many old powerlifters do you know? Do you really want to be like that group of athletes?
This is a category error. McGill is saying that the training and loading of deadlifts and powerlifters produces characteristic and, by implication, inevitable injury patterns. I don't see any data here, but let's assume that's true. You still have all your work ahead of you. You haven't even begun to demonstrate that the same applies to those training not for competition, where the athlete must push his body beyond limit, but for health, where it is implicit and imperative that we are not pushing beyond the limit, because that's not healthy. I mean, I feel like this is so obvious that it's weird to have to point it out.
If that's the case, we eliminate deadlifts. We had an athlete here yesterday, and they're at the end of their career. And I took them out and we went for a 10-minute walk to a hill that we have. And I'll say, here's why you're not going to do deadlifts, but here's what I want you to do. I showed them a monster walk. Okay, monster walk. Now we're going to the bottom of the hill, and I want you to lean back into the hill, and we're walking backwards. You're going to align your foot, ankle, knee, and hip, and push through the knee, through the knee, through the knee, backwards up the hill. Do you know, after 30 meters, they were absolutely done. Here they are doing all this deadlifting, and they don't even have the leg strength, endurance to walk backwards 30 meters.
Listen to that again, and you'll find it really easy to imagine Michael Scott saying it. It's that weird and that dumb. I really don't want to think that McGill is being obtuse here. Let's take two populations. One has performed strength training with deadlifts and the other has not. The average deadlift and leg strength for the strength group is relatively high for general population, while that for the other is average or low. Let's add a third group, a group of extremely well-conditioned Olympic gymnasts. Which one of these three groups will not be relatively fatigued by Stuart's exercise the first time they do it? None. None groups won't be fatigued, for the same reason that I could expect to get my ass kicked if I went to a Pilates class or a climbing gym, no matter how strong I am. Because when you try any non-trivial physical task that you haven't trained before for the first time, you're going to be inefficient and waste a lot of energy trying to learn the movement and, not fall down. But I will pose you a counter question. Who will learn and adapt to this skill faster, all other things being equal? The guy with a solid deadlift or the guy who's never deadlifted? I'd hazard a guess, but it would be just that, because as far as I know, that data doesn't exist. But my guess would not be the guy who never deadlifted. And here's the thing. I think running backwards up a hill benefits from strength training, because I think strong athletes just do better. This is true of all the fitness attributes, but particularly strength, because strength is fundamental to movement. And all things being equal, the stronger athlete will perform any task at least as well and probably better than a similarly practiced but weaker athlete. But it's ultimately a matter of practice, not training. If you came to me and told me you wanted to win a backwards hill running upward racy thing, I'd prescribe deadlifts and squats and a program of barbell-based strength training to cover the general fitness attribute of strength, which is critical for all athletic endeavors, even the silly ones like this. And I'd prescribe general conditioning. And, this is critical, a whole lot of backward hill run-upping. Because duh.
Totally inappropriate stimulation of their athleticism makes it really good. For you, let's do it again. We walk down the hill, we do 3 steps every walk, and then we play the near life grip, which I like to do a lot of. Now I say, walk forward up the hill, but pretend you have 100 in your cheeks. Don't play anyone taking a walk across the hills, and they say, I've never felt this before. The brain perceives exhausted quads, and now has to go into the only thing left. So what else we'll do an exhaustion focus to stimulate the thing really wanted, and I convince that person after that. What we do and train now to get a well-rounded and sustainable athleticism that will spare their joints still have great training capacity. But I think their athleticism is going to go through the roof. And, I've taken some very accomplished power lifters, and we've taken out all the squats and just do sled work, backwards walking up hills, some of these old time techniques, and their joints settle down.
This is mostly irrelevant, but did you notice the implication that general population level squats are bad for joints by pointing again to the specific population of powerlifters?
They get a sustainable fitness. They lose this idea of maximum effort, squats and deads, and now they're thinking of the word sufficient strength.
Sufficient strength is an interesting concept. How much strength is that? Well, that's a decision that has to be made by the individual. How do we decide it? What are the criteria? Fitness is the ability of an individual to meet the demands of his or her particular environment. When Ed Cohn was training to rule the world of powerlifting, there was no sufficient strength. He couldn't be too strong. But that's not what you and I do. The 60, 70, 80, and 90-year-olds I've been training for years don't train for pro powerlifting meets or championships. They train to play with their grandkids and go swimming and improve their back pain and knee function and bone density, which they do. They don't train for the true one-rep maxes that lie within or just outside their age-adjusted genetic potential. They just train to gain and hang on to strength. And they use deadlifts and squats, and they're fine. My clients are fine. And so are Andy Baker's, and Emily Sokolinski's, and Will Morris's clients, and all the general population athletes who train in strength training facilities all across the world. Stuart McGill is not the only guy out there with clinical experience to call upon. We who use barbells to train general population adults rather than broken down former powerlifters, we have clinical experience too, and that experience is just as real and valid as McGill's. And we don't see what McGill is talking about. We see the opposite. Of course, that's just dueling anecdotes, but I think it makes the point. That which can be asserted with anecdote in the absence of controlled data can be refuted with anecdote in the absence of controlled data. McGill is implying that deadlifts and squats are contraindicated as if it were an established empirical fact. It's not. Not even close. What else you got?
Sufficient mobility, sufficient endurance, and we've been doing this long enough now that we've tracked them, and those are the ones that are getting through. Again, let's go get any one of our colleagues who are orthopedic surgeons. Tell us who you're replacing the hips of. Well, 50-year-old Caucasian women who have done yoga for 30 years, okay, and men around 50 who've done deadlifts all their life. Let's go get any one of our colleagues who are orthopedic surgeons. Any one of our colleagues who are orthopedic surgeons, who are orthopedic surgeons, or orthopedic surgeons. Any one of our colleagues who are orthopedic surgeons.
Okay.
Hey, Fred.
Hey, how you doing, John?
Good to see you, my man. Good to see you. Fred, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I've been in practice for 32 years. I do general orthopedics and mostly upper extremity now. Trained at Cornell.
You ever heard of it?
And University of Medicine Dentistry of New Jersey. And I've been in practice in Northeast Pennsylvania for the last 32 years. So, I see a variety of patients, all sorts. I've done hip and knee replacements many years. I see an older population, active population, sports population. So,
Do you see what he's seeing? Is this your clinical experience that he's talking about here?
No, no. As far as like patients who've been involved in lifting, having higher incidence of joint replacements, no, I don't see that. I think a lot of times there may be some occupational relationships. There's definitely traumatic things. There's body habitus, those things more than someone who's dedicated in a lifting program. I don't see those. In fact, I will routinely prescribe strengthening for patients with mild to moderate arthritic change, and I get good results. So it's kind of the opposite we're saying.
Matter of fact, it's been a year and a half, couple of years ago, we reviewed some papers on the use of resistance training, particularly squats and deadlifts, immediately after knee. And I think we looked at some hip surgery stuff,
As
hip
well.
replacement surgery
Yeah.
stuff as well. And you're a lifter, aren't you?
Yes, yes, I am. Yeah.
And do you, in fact, plan on playing with your grandkids on the floor someday?
Yeah, well, I think so, and lift them up and do a lot of other things too.
Cool.
To me, I found that the barbell is perfect for movement, and basically just it's loaded in anatomy, and it keeps us functional, right? We have to lift things, we have to push things, we have to pull things. I personally don't see people getting injured with this. I don't see that. And
I mean, I see, I see people getting tweaked, but I don't know of any physical exercise system that doesn't result in people getting tweaked from time to time.
yeah,
I mean, yeah, I mean, I've hurt myself under the bar. I've
yeah.
also hurt myself picking up kittens or Arima paper or something like that. I mean, it's just the body's just, it betrays you sometimes.
Absolutely. Flexion rotation causes more problems than barbell lifting, that's for sure. And that can be done with a Kleenex box.
Right, exactly. Axial loading, he sort of mentioned it in passing, but it was in a context in which it seemed almost like he was suggesting that axial loading was somehow toxic. And I've got to tell you, I have a hard time signing on to that. The idea that, that maybe we shouldn't load our axial skeleton and our hips with a lot of weight. And I'm rather inclined to believe, based in large part on my reading of the literature and my clinical experience with clients who come back and say, hey, I've been training here for 2 years and I don't have osteoporosis in my spine
Right.
anymore, right?
Right.
I mean,
Right.
that happens here.
Yes.
And so I was wondering if you had any observations or thoughts on that.
I think it's basically the stress recovery and adaptation cycle again. When you're loading the skeleton, bone will respond to strengthening just like everything else. And the same thing can happen when you do it wrong. When they're bringing up examples of people doing heavy deadlifts multiple times a week. We'll see in the spring. I'm going to see a bunch of people with stress fractures in the lower extremities. Just going to see them because they haven't done anything, and then they're going to try to pull it off real quick, not giving themselves time to recover, and they're going to get them.
Not just not just from deadlifts. Runners
No,
will
it's
get them.
walking.
Tennis players will get right. Exactly. So, I mean, there's this emphasis at the beginning that, we should be careful and we shouldn't overtrain the skeleton. We shouldn't overtrain our, like, hey, no kidding. Like we kind of know that. So there's almost this sense in which, like, you know what, you people are too stupid to do deadlifts and program them properly
right.
and not hurt yourself. And I find that a little bit objectionable.
I think too is the population they were talking about. Competitive powerlifters.
Powerlifters, yeah.
They're going to push the envelope. That's why they're competitive. That's their sport. We're talking in a population of people, middle-aged or over, who are doing repetitive loading of their skeleton in proper ways, supervised. I think it's highly safe and it's completely beneficial in my opinion.
Completely different animal. I agree.
Yeah. And personally, when I got into this and through the barbell prescription, I'll tell you how I popped into that 2017, I guess, right? Like that point where literally it changed everything. I had nursed a back pain for 6 months. and I did everything on, my part. Oh, do this. Once I got into the barbell, guess what? Back pain went away and basically stayed away. A couple tweaks here and there that who knows how I
Sure.
got them. But no, I'm in completely fine that way. Completely. So, look.
Fred, you're always welcome on our channel, and thanks for making another great contribution with us. And I look forward to seeing you
Yeah,
on some online coaching.
that's right.
And can't thank you enough.
Hey, listen. Thanks. And when you have I love your new place there too, by the way.
Isn't it great? Actually,
Yeah,
you have the place of honor. This is the first video where we actually show our new place, and here you are. So
all right, awesome.
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah,
well, when you,
come visit us again.
Let me know.
All right,
right?
we will.
All right, John.
All right,
You
take care, my friend.
You're looking great. I'll see you.
Sir.
All right. Bye now.
So I've seen artificial hips in deadlifters, sure. I've had deadlifters go get an artificial hip. I've sent them to get their hips done. Because as McGill himself points out, 50-year-old yoga instructors get hip arthritis. And so do runners, and so do dancers, and so do powerlifters, and so do couch potatoes. In fact, the majority of hip implants I ever saw in my long clinical career were in couch potatoes. So what? What's the incidence of hip arthritis in general population strength trainees performing deadlifts in a general program for health compared to a control measured in a properly sized longitudinal study? Well, put a pin in that. We'll get to that in a minute. But next, here's some stuff about the correlation between VO2 max, grip strength, and longevity, which doesn't say anything about deadlifts, which, by the way, can increase your grip strength.
So I'm like you. I don't do deadlifts, but I pick up 100-pound bucked up logs as an example, big oak log. So that's my stone lift. Load that into the log splitter and still split my wood. People comment on my hands. This athlete who came yesterday, I shook his hand when he came to the door, and he couldn't fit his hand around mine. And he said, "Whoa!" When we were young, we didn't have dumbbells. My dad would give us a cinder block. Cinder blocks.
Yeah.
That's how you develop. Anyway, as you know, the importance of grip strength, I will take any day over how much you deadlift.
Yeah. People often ask me, Stuart, why do you think grip strength is such a great proxy for longevity? And I say it's the same reason I think VO2 max is a great proxy for longevity. Those are probably the two best biomarkers we have. It sounds crazy, by the way, that your VO2 max and your grip strength are better predictors of how long you're going to live than whether or not you smoke, drink, what your family history is for cancer. Like, those things all matter, but it's amazing how dwarfed they are by those two. And
McGill insinuates that he'll take grip strength over deadlifts any day. Fine. Let's take a hypothetical population of people who deadlift and another population who don't. Which population will have higher average grip strength? In fact, I'd be willing to bet that a population of deadlifters will have higher VO2 max than the general population too. Because general population is a population of jelly donuts. But this is all beside the point, because it's far too easy for the casual listener, given what's being said here, to get the idea that grip strength and VO2 max aren't just correlated with longevity, but that they actually in and of themselves cause longevity. And that is far from established or even likely.
And of course, that also speaks to stability, right? That speaks to the stability that you have to be able to transmit force from the torso right to the hand. So agree completely.
Wow. And so that's all we got here. No actual data, but just assertions based on clinical experience with powerlifters who got old. On that basis, We're supposed to discard deadlifts? No, I don't think so. What's being discussed here does not comport with my clinical experience as a physician and as a coach. Again, you might of course just say that's my clinical experience, a big collection of anecdotes, versus someone else's big collection of anecdotes. Fair enough. Let's go to the research. Let's go to the Google Scholar and let's go to the PubMed and search for long-term, longitudinal, properly powered, properly controlled studies of adults doing decades-old deadlifts with primary outcomes of clinical, radiographic, or other biomarkers of vertebral end plate and disc degeneration and knee osteoarthritis, and see what happens. Oh, wow. There aren't any. There are, however, tons of papers on the benefits of strength training for back pain and arthritis, including deadlifts. As I pointed out before many times, the exercise science literature isn't great. And what we have here is no exception. But in aggregate, I think the data points in a clear direction. Links in the doobly-doo. So let's review. Peter wants to deadlift, and he knows he should, but sometimes he gets scared. Join the club. And Stu advises him to abandon deads because old powerlifters who've worn themselves out with crazy training for competition with unreal loads have turned out to be, well, old worn out powerlifters. And also try running backwards up a hill and see if deadlift training has prepared you for that, bro. And also, Peter and Stu go on about how you really have to be judicious and realistic in your training because, duh, while they also seem to be implying that there's no way you can be judicious and realistic with deadlift training. And so, despite all my clinical and training experience and the experience of all my athletes and the experience of all the people who watch this channel and tell me how training has changed their lives and improved their back pain and all the medical reports and studies suggesting that deadlift training confers benefits, I'm supposed to discard deads because these two guys just think they might be dangerous? No, not buying it. This is sloppy content. These are smart, hard-working guys who, like me, genuinely want to see people move and stay strong. And we absolutely need to give them props for that. I think their hearts are in the right place. They're prominent in the fitness community, they're influential, and they have both made significant contributions to the conversation on fitness. I used McGill's book to help rehab my neck a few years ago when I was struggling with a cervical radiculopathy. These guys deserve a place in that conversation, which is what makes this so disappointing. I don't want to believe that they're cynical, but it's almost as if they think we're dumb. Well, we're not. We can do better than this. And until we do better at this, there's nothing here to change my practice, either as a coach or an athlete of aging. Your mileage may vary. Thanks for watching.